Is just so fabulous to be with those who are here in room 2425. Thank you for coming out on this beautiful winter morning, and it's so great to be learning with you online. We have such an important topic today. I'll just use the title of his 1943 paper, A Theory of Human Motivation. Abraham Maslow's his paper, which is known as Maslow's hierarchy, actually asks a deep question. Why do we do what we do? Why do we do what we do? What makes us human beings tick? And that's a question that has national implications. It explains how countries work and why countries work. He writes it in 1943. We'll talk about that, what the connection is between that paper in 1943. It has all kinds of implications for how synagogues and other communities of faith work, and it has all kinds of implications for how we human beings operate in our lives. So let's thank God for the gift of learning Torah together. Baruch
Baruch
atah
atah
Adonai
Adonai
Eloheinu
Eloheinu
melech
melech
haolam,
haolam,
asher
asher
kitshanu
kitshanu
b'mitzvotav
b'mitzvotav
v'tzivanu
v'tzivanu
la'asok
la'asok
b'divrei
b'divrei
Torah.
Torah.
Fa'arevna
V'arevna
Adonai
Adonai
Eloheinu
Eloheinu
et
et
divrei
divrei
Toratcha
Toratcha
b'finu
b'finu
v'fi
v'fi
amcha
amcha
beit
beit
Yisrael.
Yisrael.
V'nihya
ונהיה אנחנו
anachnu
וצאצאינו
v'tzatzaenu v'tzatzai
וצאצאי
amcha
עמך
beit
בית
Yisrael.
ישראל.
Kulanu
כולנו
yodei
יודעי
shemecha
שמך
v'lamdei
ולמדי
Toratecha
תורתך
lishma.
לשמה.
Baruch
ברוך
atah
אתה
Adonai
אדוני
hamelamed
המלמד
Torah
תורה
la'amo
לעמו
Yisrael.
ישראל.
Baruch
ברוך
atah
אתה
Adonai
אדוני
Eloheinu
אלוהינו
melech
מלך
haolam,
העולם.
asher
אשר
bachar
בחר
banu
בנו
mikol
מכל
ha'amim
העמים
v'natan
ונתן
lanu
לנו
et
את
Torato.
תורתו.
Baruch
ברוך
atah
אתה
Adonai
אדוני
noten
נותן
haTorah.
התורה.
So the address in the Jewish canon for what we know of as Maslow's hierarchy is in the first reading, the Rishon Aliyah, in our portion today. Last week's reading, Moses comes to Pharaoh and says, "Let my people go." And Pharaoh says, not only no to let my people go, let your people go, but now it's going to be harder. They need the same tally of bricks. They have to go get their own straw. So the poor slaves, instead of putting in 12-hour days, now have to put in 16 or 17-hour days. It doesn't go well. That's where our reading begins. And it begins with those famous 5 verbs of redemption that we all know from the Passover Seder: Vahotzeti, Vehitzalti, Vagaalti, Valakachti, Veheveti. All these different forms of I am going to save, I'm going to redeem, I'm going to bring, I'm going to be your God, I'm going to take you, I'm going to bring you into the land of Israel. I'm with you, I got your back, says God. 5 times 5 verbs. And the Israelites could not hear it. Me kotzer ruach ume avodah kasha. From kotzer ruach and hard work. And Rashi interprets kotzer ruach as physiological. They actually couldn't breathe because they were working so hard. Now, that brings us to Maslow's hierarchy. And I just wanted to start by how rich this whole thing is, which is he writes this paper in 1943. And I'm exactly the opposite of an expert in Maslow. I just know it like anybody else knows it, and I did a little bit of quick and dirty research on the internet. But it feels like he's asking an obvious question, which is the question that was Elie Wiesel's question in every first day of every BU class he taught. If you read Ariel Berger's book, Witness, and Berger was Elie Wiesel's teaching assistant for more than 20 years, Elie Wiesel would ask the following question, and I think it's the question that Maslow's asking in 1943. How could the land of Mozart give us Hitler? How could the land of Kant, the ethical imperative, give us Hitler? How could the land that was not just advanced, but the most advanced, not just refined, but the most refined, not just urbane, but the most urbane, give us Hitler? And how could Germans who were, Berger quotes Wiesel saying this. They were amazing children who took care of their elderly parents. They were amazing pet owners. They were just devoted to their cats and dogs. They went to church. They went to symphonies. How do they bring Hitler to the world? And how do they become Hitler's willing executioners? That was Wiesel's question, and I think that is what motivates Maslow's paper in 1943. And what do you take his answer to be? If that's his question, what is his answer? And then let's talk about what that has to say about our world. We're going to start with national implications. I want to talk about Germany in the 30s and 40s. I want to talk about America today. I want to talk about Israel and Ben Gvir. Then I want to talk about what Maslow's hierarchy means to us at Temple Emmanuel in terms of synagogue life and communities of faith in general. Then I want to talk about individuals and what it means for our individual lives.
All
What
of
is
that
his?
today?
Yeah, all of that today. What's his answer? How does Maslow explain Hitler?
The floor is yours. Anybody
Uh,
wants to start with that?
I'm trying to get the answer that you're fishing for.
I'm not fishing.
Um,
I'm not. No, no, no. I'm not
I mean,
fishing.
there certainly are historians who would argue to you that the economic and social straits that the Germans had been in from World War I
Right.
motivated them to feel like they were disenfranchised. Is that what you're
Well, yeah.
looking for
I'm not
here?
fishing. I'm just trying to understand what he's saying. I mean, we know from being good conservative rabbis that every text has a context, right? And you can't understand a text until you understand the context. So the context of his paper, Theory of Human Motivation, is 1943, and I think he's kind of asking a question that is, you know, when you have people feeling not safe and not protected. If you look, by the way, at his, just take a quick look as a refresher. Look on page 6 of the handout. You see, and there's different formulations of Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, but he talks about you need physiologically, you need to feel provided for and safe. You need then belonging and love and community. You need esteem. Um, you need work that and ideas that give you fulfillment. You need some pleasure and beauty, and then only once all the lower levels of the apex are taken care of can you get to self-actualization and transcendence and ideas and ideals and your best self. And so I think what he's saying, just very simply, is when a country feels bereft, when its citizens feel not safe, when they feel hungry, when they feel haggard, when they feel ragged, then their higher values are just not so relevant, and they need fulfillment of more base levels now, and that's what Hitler was promising. Um, and I think that is actually the origin of this hierarchy of needs. You got to take care of base needs for a nation before the nation's higher ideals. And first, just react to that about that, and then I want to talk about 2016, and I want to talk about Ben Gvir last month.
But
Go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I was gonna say
Pregnant woman first.
one of the interesting things for me when we go with their teenagers to Israel and we go to Yad Vashem is there's an exhibit where they show all of um, the highest ranking Nazis and their careers, and they're like doctors and they're like physicians and they're lawyers and they're scholars, and you go down this, it's a very, very chilling wall. And so it feels like there's also, on Maslow's hierarchy, the way that I'd always understood it is it's about your basic needs, right? If you're out freezing in the cold, you can't think about God. If
Right.
you're in deep, one of the things that we when we go visit, do a hospital visit, something people often say is like, I feel so bad I haven't been able to pray. And it's like, of course you haven't been. Like, praying is, you need to have a sort of an internal space of ease before you can have that space of awe. Um, I'm a little bit caught in this because on the one hand I deeply see for the everyday German citizen who was impoverished by World War I and the aftermath, and who didn't have their lives together in the way they wanted, and they could have scapegoats and they could work on that. That makes sense, and it works for me according to Maslow's hierarchy. But the place it breaks down for me is that the masterminds of the movement were very much had their hierarchical needs covered. And I don't know how, like,
Right.
how is he interpreting this? And also, I know he's faced a great deal of criticism, and they didn't really quite prove this. So how does that, and what do we do with that? Is there a false hierarchy? Do we actually get to a place where our needs are so covered that we actually lose sense with our hearts? Maybe there's
Sure.
like an opposite Maslow's hierarchy.
So I just want to say, if you connect this to last week, Danny Gordis's piece last week talks about Ben Gvir, and he says, all of you who are focused on all of his noxious things, and Danny Gordis is not a fan of Ben Gvir, He says, "Do you have an answer for the Negev?" And then he talks about how the Israelis in the Negev are super vulnerable. It's very crime-ridden. There's a lot of attacks, and nobody's done jack to actually protect Israelis in the Negev. And Ben Gvir says, "If you elect me, I will protect you, and I will be a law and order politician. I'll keep you safe." And so, when I heard actually that reading that was kind of turning me on that, and then the Kotzer Ruach to Maslow, that I feel like this triangle here of needs, this hierarchy of needs, is very negative. It's like, yeah, I don't like what he says. Yeah, I don't like that he's a Kahana person. Yeah, I don't like the picture of Baruch Goldstein. But in the meantime, I'm not safe, and he's going to make me safe, and so I'm going to vote for Ben Gvir. And that connects this with Danny Gordis, I think. By the way, also, just to say it, um, this helped unlock a mystery that I had about our own country. In 2016, the candidate at the time that won the election was saying things that just felt like they clearly crossed lines, like the Mexicans this, the Mexicans send us this, the Mexicans do that, and the Muslims this, and the Muslims that. And I'm like, how does anybody who says that, which feels so contrary to our values, win? And then you read Strangers in Their Own Land, which was, a discussion of a community in Louisiana where people felt that their physical safety, their protection, their food, the lower level of the apex was not attended to. So, like Ben Gvir's voters, their voters said, okay, um, I want to be safe, I want to be protected. Dan.
Yeah, so this is actually not new in a lot of ways because it's totally Machiavellian. Machiavelli was very clear about how people can come to power and stay in power, and one of those things was to provide the masses with the basic needs, or at minimum promise them that's what would happen. And when the promise was made, even though it didn't always happen, it kept people in power. It's how people rose to power. This is exactly what Hitler did. This is exactly what the election in 2016 was all about. And we just see that human nature has not changed in the past, 500 years. In that we as human beings still we recognize this, but we still fall for it.
Yeah. So that's I just want to note that it has national implications. Um, just is. I want to shift the pivot to what the Maslow's hierarchy has to say about us at a shul. Okay? Because I realize there's an old saw, an old joke that we've all said, we've all used, you all know it, which is Cohn goes to shul to talk to God, and Garfinkel goes to talk to Cohn. Right? Cohn goes to talk to God, Garfinkel goes to talk to Cohn. Okay? And I didn't realize really until was marinating on Maslow deeply that that's a Maslow's hierarchy thing, right? Which is that Garfinkel goes to talk to Cohn. Garfinkel wants community. Garfinkel wants people. Garfinkel wants friendship. And the God thing, maybe it comes, maybe it doesn't come. But if I can just have kiddush, if I can just have community, thinking about coming out of the pandemic, all that simus and all the hours we spent thinking about how can we actually provide a space where people could sit down with a bagel, tuna fish, coffee, and friendship for an hour inside. That is a Maslow's hierarchy thing. And I guess my question is, what are the implications of this for how we reach our people more deeply?
I'll jump in. Um, there's a saying that my mom said she actually learned from a cult leader, which sounds bad, but it's actually a great saying, which is that you give people what they want until they want what you have to give. That you satisfy people's deepest needs where they're at until they're satiated and ready. I think that's an interpretation of Maslow.
Right.
And so, as we're thinking about our shul community, it's important not just to think about what we want to give, but what people want to receive. And I think that's a philosophy that we definitely feel here, and have created with our seven gates and with thinking about how we meet everyone's needs where they're at.
Can I ask a question about cultural patterns, which is, um, why is it that, as a general proposition, we Jews, the Jewish community, are so challenged on God at the apex at the top of the apex? I'm reading a great book, by the way. It's the next book for T.E. Reads. I haven't enjoyed a book like this for a long time. It's called The Latecomers. It is Latecomers. Latecomers. It is a fabulous piece of fiction. I'm enjoying it like a bonbon. But it's really rich. But in it, it's about the Oppenheimer triplets who are, they grow up in New York City. They're the children of a financial firm, so very wealthy. And they're Reformed Jews. They go to Temple Emmanuel in New York City, but very disconnected, Jewishly, very disconnected to each other. And two of the kids go off to Cornell, and the son has the god of roommate allocation, the computer. He rooms with a Mormon. That's that I think they use the term Latter Day Saints, but in the book it's just referred to as a Mormon, and it's in Cornell, and so where Joseph Smith found the golden tablets, according to their tradition, in 1820 is in Palmyra, a drive away from Ithaca, from Cornell. And so this Jewish roommate is invited to go to a gathering of Latter-day Saints at Joseph Smith's Hill, and he sees an entire community of Latter-day Saints, of Mormons, who yearn for God, get God, are deeply connected to God. And in the course of it, he says to himself, I've never seen this, I've never felt this. I don't come from a family that has this kind of connection to God. I don't come from a synagogue that has this connection to God. I don't come from a people that has this connection to God. They're like deeply connected to God. What is this, and why don't I have it? And I kind of want it. And so I, I guess I want to just surface that question. Why is it that so many of us are stuck at the kiddush level? I mean, I love kiddush. Kiddush is great, but the height where many of us get to is kiddush, and people, and I want to see Garfinkel, but so few of us actually seem to really connect with the God piece, and I'm wondering why is that as a cultural pattern, as compared to evangelical Christians or Mormons, etc. Any takers?
Yeah, I'm gonna take a
Please.
stab at it. It's probably a little off base, but I'm not sure that it may have to do with Jews and our history of persecution for 2 millennia, and how that affects maybe two generations ago, the Jews in Eastern Europe were probably more connected to a God-centered life than American Jews are, for the most part, except for maybe small enclaves in this country. And I'm not sure if that may have to do um, with with the Holocaust, with our persecution. It may also have to do with the fact that we are Israel-centric, and having been exiled again for 2 millennium, with that yearning, once maybe things have changed now that the state of Israel is there, that our sense of direction may have been misguided a little bit. Just a step.
I'm not sure that we're going to answer this question in just this one class, but I wonder whether it's accurate, the premise of it, because I think a piece of it is right. Certainly, what you're saying, Dan, post Holocaust, the breakdown of a sense of connection to God. There's also an entire generation of conservative rabbis who never spoke about God from the Bima, and
Right.
so part of you set the table for what you hope to receive, to serve there at the table, and for an entire generation, we were not setting our table for God. But I do think, especially in the pandemic, it's something a little different. It's not that people are not finding God or looking for God. It felt to me, at least, that there's not a space or a place where they can understand that within organized religion, because there's been such a thrust towards what we used to call Sheilaism, like
Right.
my religion is, I do spirituality in this way or that way or that way, and it's divorced from their understanding of, what does God want from me or need from me is not the language that we speak often as liberal Jews.
Yeah, a couple of things that I want to say. First of all, I believe that roommate or your classmate that was Mormon is more comparable in Judaism with Orthodox Jews. all right, more Haredim, that they have a different vision of what God is, and they act more towards that. In a way, we are a very small percentage of Jewish people, because I don't know if we are even half of the Jewish population around the world that are not Orthodox. And within that half, how many of those come to synagogue and try to pray? So we are a very small fraction to begin with. And then second one, Argentina had a huge immigration at the same time that America was having, the beginning of the century, last century. And most of the Jews that went to Argentina were socialist and communist, all right? And when they got down there, they wanted to organize the Jewish community, but not in a religious way. And the Holocaust didn't even happen at the time. I'm talking about 1910, 1920, 1900s. So not necessarily I believe that Jews stopped believing in God with the Holocaust. It could be that many of them, but not necessarily that is the case. And yeah.
Yeah, I also have this image in my mind. We were on the streets of Jerusalem with our tour that we were just on, the family trip, and there's the Na Na Nachman people. Have you ever seen the
Yeah.
the van that comes by, and they're dancing and they're ecstatically, praise God and worship God, and our kids, all our Temple Emmanuel kids who are not here at shul, most of the time, jumped right in there with them into that dancing, into that experience. If you set the table, people are responsive to that table.
Can I just, okay, that's so evocative to me. Because I also, when I was in Israel at the same time you were, seeing my father over Hanukkah, and Chabad owns Hanukkah in Israel, at least in Jerusalem. I mean, they're out all the time. A lot of energy, so much more energy than we have. Do we just look, do you need to look like a real rabbi to inspire that? Do you need a beard and the black and the hat? Like, do we look like investment bankers?
Can
And
I
so
can I
we're
share?
screwed.
Can
We're
I?
screwed. We look like investment bankers.
Wes,
No, no, I'm serious. And it was because why that whole thing, and you see the same thing play out in college campuses throughout the country. That I'm drawn to the Chabad house with a real rabbi and a real rebbitzin and their 7 children, and going to the Hillel house with a bunch of investment banker conservative rabbis like us. So do we just need to grow a beard? Like, why is it? What is it about that your story?
Speak for
The
yourself. Challenging.
the Nachman, they are from, and our kids are like, oh yeah, I'll take that. But if we like offer a class with boring Temple Emmanuel rabbis, it
have you
doesn't.
tried
it
free
doesn't help.
Shabbat dinners?
Right. So I think it actually may be a little bit different because our kids rationally, we're not saying, oh, I love the values that they're speaking about in terms of my lived experience or my life. They were caught up in the joy and in the sense of connecting with God, with spirit, with country, with connecting into something bigger than themselves.
So can we do
and
that
the
here?
question is, right, I very much believe that we can and even sometimes do that
Well,
here.
And I
Yeah.
also think there's another element, which is that Chabad doesn't focus on what's missing; they focus on what's there. And Michelle, you were telling me this beautiful thing about the Shiloh house, about the way that they approach kashrut, which is that you do what your parents do, and they focus on what everybody's doing right, rather than what kids are missing and sending them home like, how dare you? Why didn't you? Why aren't you? Why couldn't you? And I think that there's a space that we, as conservative Jews, we have a large share of the worry market in terms of what will happen to our children in a way that other people don't have.
We own the worry market.
We own
Yeah.
the worry market. And so then like our kids, speaking of like, if you want to go back to this hierarchy, right? Our kids are like that fear, that worry, that anxiety about the next generation doesn't actually fulfill the spiritual need that they have in their hearts. And so and then the more that doesn't fill it, and they're like, well, I'm not finding what I need here, I'm going to go elsewhere, that feeds our worry. And so then we're more worried about them. So they're getting even less of that juice that you're talking about, because that spiritual experience that you're saying is it's joy, it's light, it's goodness. There's no negativity in that.
So, Lisa,
Can I
last night you had 60 people for your dinner. So it's a cold, rainy, snowy January New England deal, and you had 60 people who don't live in Newton, right? They have to get here from where they live, which is not Newton. And 60 people came last night, and they came to Shabbat Alive, and then they had a Shabbos dinner. And you do that in your magical way with your magical dust, like every month, more than once a month. You know, these 60 people from not Newton come to Temple Emmanuel and do Shabbos. What are they looking for, and do they find it?
Most of them are looking for partners.
Okay.
They're looking for. I mean, that's honestly, it's a. I would say not a meat market, but it's a meat market. But let's be honest. But
Is that
they're also
MEET?
looking for.
Yes.
They're also looking for, I think a lot of the young adults that I see I say like are recovering from their religious school educations that they many of them have these traumatic experiences where they had to learn because I said so, or like, people will tell stories that like my dad had a bar mitzvah and he hated learning everything, and then when I came to have my bar mitzvah, he said you had to do exactly the same thing, and so there's all of that energy, and I think part of what we try to do with Yesod is sort of to flip the narrative that it's a practice of joy, that Judaism can be fun, that services we're not the most spiritual, but we have a social group going. We make services like Cohen going to talk to God, like everybody's hanging out together. That's as much a part of the dinner as the dinner is itself, the experience of services, and we have young adults that come back on their own, but it's like it's a gateway drug. The dinner is a gateway drug to Judaism in our community.
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna also add, what you talked about before. Do you think that numbers also make a difference? For instance, like we think about, I know you love these mega churches, some of these preachers,
Right.
and of course, what draws, I don't know, 5,000 people to a church on a snowy Sunday in Iowa, that are connecting to God, that we could be trying to loop into
Yeah.
somehow.
There is, I don't have the answer, but that is a question I have, right? Which is, I just find that from my read of the world, we Jews are uniquely, at least the Jews that I know here, my own heart, starting with that, and the people that I know and live, my wife, my kids, we're blocked on God. We're blocked on God in ways that the Christians that I read about are. I saw several Christian groups in Israel when I was there, fundamentalist Christians, and they are glowing. They're glowing, walk and in ways that we don't glow.
I got to explain a Shabbos elevator to the Christian tourists who were
Right.
in town going to see all of the Christian holy sites, and
I would've
they
paid
were
to see that.
just amazed at how, at this tradition that had thought about
Yeah.
that. I wanted to ask the question about Kotzer Ruach because I think one of the big challenges is that everybody in their life faces at some point kotzer ruach. And the question is, can you bring that into this space? Is your spiritual space a place where you can bring your pain, your heaviness, your realness, or do you have to dress up in your fur coat and pretend, oh yes, everybody's great, they're doing terrific?
Right.
And how much do we provide a space for that kotzer ruach to be acknowledged, to be seen, and then to say, we have the balm that can help you here in this moment? Because I do think a lot of, if you're talking about Mormons, you're talking about Christians, a lot of what they do is say, we see you. We see that life is hard, that you're carrying heavy burdens. Here, come take off your shoes, rest a while. God has something that can help heal your heart.
Right.
And I think if I'm looking at this parsha this week, that there's an amazing midrash about how the men in their kotzer ruach had decided not to have children anymore, and the women come and they say, "Here, take off your shoes, sit a while. Let's, let me give you a hug. Let's be connected together, and let's try to heal that aching heart and that sense of not able to breathe."
Right.
And so I think to the extent that a religious tradition is able to not only see but answer not just our joys. Our joys is really important, but our pains,
Right.
I think, makes a difference in terms of how authentic
Right.
you're able to feel the presence of God.
Yeah, and that is why, by the way, the beating heart of any synagogue is the daily minyan, because the daily minyan is the place that people come to for the real pain of life to get support. I wanted to ask on that point of a synagogue as a sanctuary and a place of balm and healing. I was rereading Hillel rather, in the light of Maslow. I just want to turn to page 4 of the handout for a second, and I wanted to ask Elias and Eliza a question about Hallel and just about tefillah in general and how you make it come alive for yourself and for a congregation. If you look on page Psalm 116, this is very much to me a Maslow's hierarchy prayer. I love knowing that Adonai listens to my cry of supplication because God does hear me. I will call on God in days of need. The cords of death encompassed me. The grave held me in its grip. I found myself in distress and despair. I called on Adonai. I prayed that God would save me. Gracious is God and kind. Our God is compassionate. Adonai protects the simple. I was brought low. God saved me, etc. God has delivered me from death, my eyes from tears, my feet from stumbling. I shall walk before Adonai in the land of the living. And then it goes on to say, in the next one, um, I will raise the cup of deliverance and invoke Adonai by name because God saved me. And I wanted to ask how you convey the pathos of that prayer. That is, I was almost dead, chilatzta nafshi mimaves, but you saved me from death. How do you bring the intensity of emotion of that poet into the bima so that the rest of us can access it?
So a couple of things. I was playing tennis yesterday. I was losing 3-0. I ended up winning 6-3. So the first thing I did, I came and I read this thing out loud just to thank God. So joking aside, second joke is I always do this quietly. I never say it out loud. So I don't try to convey anything to the congregation. But on a serious note,
Why is that?
I believe, well,
Like there's so much pathos here.
there is a little square at the bottom that you're supposed to do only that. But
Yes.
anyways, going a little bit more deeply, I believe that this is perhaps my view of it. I believe that the Siddur, the prayers book, have different prayers for different people in different occasions. All right? So when things don't work well in my life or in something tragic happens, I don't come and read this. This doesn't speak to me at all. All right? So you always very often said, I didn't realize that until such and such. And that is what the Siddur is to me. Prayers for different occasions. And not necessarily I would say, we are not always in the same mood. Our lives are complicated. We are not always happy and cheery. So at times we just go over, just keep
So Les,
going.
what do you, as a prayer leader, as a chazan, what do you do when you're not feeling it? When the words convey an emotion of the poet that doesn't actually speak to you? That's not where I am. Like you have to sing Hallel on a down day for you.
Well, yes, it's a good point. And my answer is that we as professionals, we don't serve only us. We serve the congregation. And I'm sure there is somebody in the congregation who is enjoying this very much. So you have to do it for them as a prayer leader, as a representative of the Kahal.
It's also there's a level of healing associated. I don't know. I find as somebody who leads and participates to be able to say I may be hurting right now, but I'm part of a community where there is joy, and that brings me a sense of potential and possibility and hope into dark
Right.
spaces.
By that, just to make, I didn't want to lose the main point. The main point is that this is Maslow because this poet on Psalm 116 is at the apex of the triangle, at the top of it, transcendence, God, I'm bringing a cup of joy and thanksgiving to God. But the reason the poet can do it is because the poet feels saved physically, feels safe, feels saved. Like the apex, I was dying. Chilas tonashi mimavet. You saved me, God. So my base is now fulfilled. Now, God, thank you. I bring you right. So this is very Maslow in a way I never really realized. Eliza, how do you try to convey that?
So I think I'm often a fan of musical dissonance when it comes to texts like these, and often pick radically cheerful tunes for really sad, tragic texts, because I feel like there's a way in which the music can help you to access the joy that's within every crisis moment, and that's part of our spiritual work, is to be able to, within the deepest moments of pain, acknowledge joy, acknowledge the possibility and the optimism and the hope. So this one's a funny one because there's just, and I don't know how much of it has to do with the lack of like really catchy tunes. There just aren't really, like, there are a lot of catchy tunes for a lot of other psalms, and this one just like doesn't get a lot of love. Um,
But that is a very Alisa Berger view of what music is for the synagogue, because as you know well, our tradition that goes on for centuries always tries to reflect what the poet wrote in terms of music.
Yeah. Um,
To
yeah.
also,
Yeah.
so like you asked Elias and Elise a very interesting question, and I wanted to actually bring it back to you, like how, like when you had a loss on Yamim Noraim, and you had to bring your best to the kahal. How did
Right.
you manage to do that? You really have to be like a split personality at that point, right?
Yeah.
As a leader of the kahal, and yet you are in deep mourning. I mean, think that happens to many of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
My mom died on Rosh Hashanah day one, and I found out about it walking back from Tashlich.
Right.
And my kids met me. They had gotten the call, and I was going to Mincha Rosh Hashanah, and then the next day was the Happy Clappy Contemporary
Right.
service.
Exactly. Right.
And I would I so there's two moves. One is just be a professional and compartmentalize. It's not about me. It's about the synagogue. It's about the community. But the other way, I channeled the wisdom of Michelle once when I had come to her also around Rosh Hashanah with personal brokenness, and and asked her, how do you do the holidays when you have personal brokenness that you're carrying? And she said you could compartmentalize, be a professional, or you could channel that brokenness into your tefillot and make them even richer and make them more emotional, make them more deeply heartfelt. That's what I tried
Yeah,
to do.
a
But yeah,
question for all of you, because
yeah.
I believe that we spend countless hours planning stuff, but we never talk deeply about this. Do you have moments in tefillah that you do this?
Do this
Yes.
all the time.
Because for example, I tend, let's be realistic here. I tend to focus on, for example, if last night, all right? If the musician, if that guy is playing the correct thing, if the levels of the microphones are fine, when I'm singing, try to do the best technically speaking, all
Right.
right, and connect that to the words. But I wouldn't call that necessarily praying.
But that's Maslow's hierarchy. If the musicians were all perfect and the microphones were all
Right.
perfect and everything was perfect, then
Or-
I know, but
even
wait,
not.
I'm going
Right.
to another point. I'm trying to
Right.
take the conversation to another point, another place. What I'm saying is that at times, silent Amida, okay? I close my eyes. I'm so bored of reading the same text over and over. So I create my own prayers. And they are usually talking to God, like, hey, God, I'm here.
Right.
Thank you for such and such. My son is going to college. Thank you so much for that. Or thank you for helping. Or please help my mom. I have every Shabbat, every service I do, I close my eyes and I think about that. But it's not necessarily what it's written in the text.
Right. That's the famous story about. Uh, I think it's Lev Yitzchak of Berdichev in his shul was looking for a Baal Tekiah, somebody to blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, and a number of people came, and he all asked them, "What are you thinking about when you blow the shofar?" Because I'm more interested in your kavanah than the sound of the horn. And the guy who wins says, I have 4 unmarried daughters, and I want God to help me find partners for my daughters. And Levi Yitzchak hired him because his prayers were real. So I guess I want to say, I mean, what I like about this, yeah,
you guys have those moments?
Look, I had that moment last night when Talia Greenberg was doing her little riff in the Ein Od and going off into this beautiful place and sort of hearing all the voices together, coming together. I absolutely feel God's
At
presence.
that point, I was thinking about what was for dinner at home.
so, so I guess I'll leave this class on this note, which is, if you think of Maslow's hierarchy, you think that you can't get to God and spirit and ideas and ideals until everything is good down below the triangle. right? And I think, Elias, what you're inviting us to think about, and Michelle, what you've been inviting us to think about is how you can get to God specifically when the bottom part of the triangle is not okay, right? When you're not okay. I mean, like when everything's okay and you're good and you're safe, the people you love are good and you're safe. Then we do the Psalm 116. God, I offer a prayer of thanksgiving. I offer this cup of wine to you, God. Thank you. That's classic Maslow. But a variation is, I'm so screwed. I'm so broken. I'm so messed up. I'm so hopeless. I got nothing, but I turn to you, God. And can we find God in the brokenness? That's a whole other way to get to the top of the triangle. Take us away with a song.
Yeah, Michelle, you're really good at connecting stories with text. Any suggestions?
For songs for now.
Let's do it. Let's
What
do a
about
page. Let's do Psalm
Dan?
116, Elias. With something for Psalm
Yes.
116.
Yes.
Dan, here's my question. What do we have that speaks most to God's presence for us, cantorial colleagues?
Well, since we maybe Mina Metzar-Karatia.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I'll buy that.
That is a song that is an upbeat song. And can you, with better English, translate
And
that for everybody?
From out of the depths, I call you. From the narrow place, I reach out to you, God, and you answer me.
Yes. Mina
Metzar-Karatia, Anani Bamerchabia, Mina Metzar-Karatia, Anani Bamerchabia, Anani, Anani, Anani Bamerchabia, Anani, Anani, Anani Bamerchabia.
Thank you,
Shalom, everyone.
colleagues.